Next segment here is going to be making the arm and the hand. So where we left off last was with the spine. So now we're going to build out our arm. We're going to do the simple one to begin with. And then we'll build the more complex one. So it can be first part will be for the 160 class, and the second part is 161. And you can just notice that I'm going to build this from the top view now. So everything we've been building up until this point was on the X axis, and so we're doing it from the right side. So this time we're going to do it from the top, which is going to put our joints really pretty much at the not pretty much, but at the axis right here, the Y. And so when we make it, we'll finish. We'll want to push it back up here. Just take a look and just notice that we're generally speaking relatively even with the hip joints. Where the shoulder is going to be. Just kind of make a note of where that would be. I'm going to switch over and hold space bar, switch over, go to top view. So sometimes it's a little hard to see the shoulder from this top view, but looking pretty good about there, which is right about on the hip, right? So I'm going to go to skeleton, create joints. I'm going to drag in, come a little bit forward, trying to exaggerate slightly the angle. And then finish here on the wrist. And that's the whole arm portion. And then this last part is for the fingers and the hand. So our first joint we're going to put right where the fingers would start bending. Okay. And what I tend to do is actually not just click out and just put one out, but rather hold shift and drag straight ahead. Sorry. Let me just put that wrist one back in there. What I like to do is hold shift and then drag out in the direction that I want it to go, and it kind of snaps it. And so then no matter which way I go, it only goes straight. And this just sort of locks that joint into a really straight orientation. I kind of prefer that here. Now, I don't really have divisions or three knuckles on this particular model, but I'll maybe add one in there in a moment. Not now, but when we go to rig it. And basically, I'm just putting out my joints across here, and I'm holding shift as I do that. So let me one more time, because I was talking while I did that, but I'm just going to hold shift and I'm just going to drag out, holding shift. This is going to be my knuckle, holding shift, still clicking out. I'm just gonna, this is going to be my second knuckle, and this is finger end. And I'm kind of running out of room, as you can see, like it's a little tight in there. It's hard when the joints are this big sometimes seeing the fingers, and so we were talking about the different scenarios here, like how to deal with that. If you change the size of the tools, you can actually change the radius size as you build them. It's one way to deal with that. You can also just build them and then make them smaller later. So if I hit return, I can open up all the joints and grab the last of the joints and change the radius here as well. So this was another way we could change our radius, which made it a little easier to deal with and see in the finger area. So we were changing radius depending on where we were working. So you can see that it's a little bit far. I don't have a good place. I didn't really actually create a line here, so I'm not as excited about the positioning, right? So as far as a class goes, generally speaking, I would just say make a new one, and just do this until you feel really good about the placement of everything. And it's usually worth a couple tries. Just, you get in there and you see what you like and what you didn't like about what you did, and then start over. So I'm getting a little extra closer here so that I'm not so far off. There. Pretty good. Okay, so again, if I want to change the size of that, let's click on the wrong one there. Oh, no, you should crash. Okay. I can open up the joint chain and then I think it's a good one to start from the joint, from the wrist, all the way down to the end, which is kind of nice, and then change the radius here. So something like 0.2. Actually, the wrist I might do something a little bit bigger, like 0.4 or something, just to sort of scale down. Sometimes it makes it a little easier to see everything down here. Then we'll need to name everything, so this is going to be shoulder, GMT, elbow, GMT, wrist, and then we usually call this finger. Knuckle, knuckle 2, and finger end. And we'll be using these later for the more complex hand too, so it's a pretty good naming convention. Okay. And then, like I said, I'm just in the perspective view now, so allows me to move this into position. I think sometimes space bar and going to front view, it's a little easier in the front view to line this up. For some reason my mouse doesn't let go right off the bat. So what I suggest is kind of looking at the fingers more than anything and trying to lay that out. Again, sometimes we get these weird bends here and stuff like that, and better model, thinking things through a little bit. It's not super wrong that it's out of the arm, but it could be a little bit straighter. So again, usually modeling things super straight is better. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go back into perspective view. So we need to make our IK handle, and then we also need to make a hand control. So start with the hand control. Selecting my copy curve. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate, Command D, or edit duplicate. This is where we do the parenting process to bring the curve over. So it's with a grouping. Just try and take my time a little bit and take your time and stop it where you need to and just do each step one at a time. And I think it should work out fine. So I'm holding X, which snaps me to the grid. And I basically want to put that thing dead center, right on the grid. Okay. I'm going to modify freeze transformations so that I have no values in the rotates and translates, so my scales are ones. I'm going to name this hand CNTO. Okay, so it's all zeroed out, it's got a name. So now what we did is we actually group this to itself. It becomes a group. We're going to take this group, we're going to call it hand group. So hand GRP. This is all zeroed out too. Remember, groups always align with the X, or with the origin rather. So what I'm going to do with the group selected, okay, and this is what kind of I think throws people off is what's to select here, but where the group is selected, shift selecting the wrist, and I'm doing that here in the perspective view and not really using my outliner. we're going to use the parenting here. So just P for parent or edit parent. Now the grouping gets put into the hierarchy for the shoulder joint, so it's sitting in here. What we do is we zero out any numbers here that are here, so it should be the translates and the rotates again. The scales we keep at 1. You just zero everything out, and then you'll see that the whole thing pops over onto the wrist from the parenting. Then we just make sure that we have the hand group still selected. So you can click on it in the outliner if you want. That helps sometimes. Just make sure it's the hand group. And now we're going to edit unparent. Now it sends itself out. So now the group actually gets values into it. So at this point, you would leave all these in here. But here you see the hand control itself has no value. Hand group does. And so now the hand control itself, when you click out in the perspective view, which is the way the animator would work on that, you can see there's no values. In fact, it doesn't even know that it moved. It still thinks it's sitting right here, which is really kind of the trick to the whole process here. It's tricking that little object. It still thinks it's sitting where it is. It doesn't know it's rotating. It doesn't even know it's moving in a way. So anyway, that's kind of the trick to that. So kind of important that we don't mess with the hand group after we do that. So that's really the last time you'll really ever do anything with that hand group. You aren't going to clear anything out with it. It's just going to stay just like it is. No one's going to really ever select it. So it really eventually will be tucked away somewhere far into a little folder, and no one will ever really work with it. It's the object on the inside, which I can select out here. It's this hand control that's inside that group is what everyone will be interacting with. And most likely they'll be clicking on it out here. Okay, so now I can just make my IK handle, skeleton IK handle right here. I'm going to go to that options box. We want to make sure that we're making a rotate plane solver. This is going to have the white triangle sticking out the back usually. So that's going to be shoulder joint, wrist joint. There's that white triangle we like to see, and that is the preferred angle. So when I bend my arm forward, the elbow is going to go backwards, and that's kind of for a way we have it set up. That's perfect. That's what we want. I'm going to call that arm IK. Okay, so looking good. So basically what we do now is do our constraints for the arm and the wrist. So all of the constraints are going to start with the hand control with the first selection, and then we'll do the point and the orient constraints selecting either the IK or the wrist. So first off, we'll start with the IK and the point constraint. So selecting the arm control first. I'm going to go to my pointer just to make it a little easier to select. Shift select the IK handle. I'm going to say constrain point. We'll always want to go to that box to make sure that we have maintain offset on. Say add. Then we're going to select the hand control one more time and shift select the wrist. We're going to do constrain orient this time. We're going to go to the box and make sure we have maintain offset. And this is probably the most important one, is the maintain offset for that orient. Just go ahead and say add. That sets us up for the hand control. And really now when I grab my hand, you can see if I grab my hand control, remember a lot of people forget and they actually have both things selected when they do this. So try to not be too excited. Make sure you act like an animator, that you would select just the arm control itself, or the hand control rather. Then if you move it, you can see that the joint's moving along, and if I rotate this, I can get my wrist into position, and if I move it, you can see that the box stays oriented to the wrist. You can really move this anywhere, and the wrist kind of stays oriented perfectly, so then when I want to go to rotate it, it's real easy to work with. And that's what you're looking for in that kind of control, is that the wrist is always consistently rotating the right direction for you. Whenever you move the arm, it's always going the right way with rotations. That sets us up for the control of the arm itself, but now let's go ahead and work on the finger. So in the class, what we did is we worked with the expressions and controlling the fingers with expressions. So one thing I realized is I didn't actually shape the box, but just it's okay even after, in fact, you've set things up, especially as long as we work in the control vertex mode. You know, I can really edit the shape a lot and get it into different position. And just in the classroom, we were kind of setting ourselves up a little bit more along these lines. It's kind of making like a little rectangular shape. And again, when you work in the control vertex mode and when you come back out, you'll see that pivot point's still in the same place and still moves everything just fine, and it'll still rotate just fine. It's going to work just exactly the same. So you can edit that shape and it still has its zeros out. And so you can play around with that a lot after it's actually connected. So again, not too big a deal. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add that attribute that we did. So we had two attributes. We, in the end, I did a finger multiplier on there at the end of the class. But what we'll do is just do the finger roll. So that was kind of the main one for this class. So I'm going to select the object. I'm going to go to Edit, Add Attribute. We'll call this finger roll. Didn't put an underscore in there. Just keep the number, you know, just again, just minimum maximums. You know, always kind of basically I haven't changed anything in any of these. I was kind of thinking, should I make it displayable here? I can't recall if I did in the class or not. I'm just going to do just a finger roll here. And I'll say, okay, so now I got my finger roll. Now, the way that we did this was we just basically had the finger roll driving the rotational values of the joints themselves. So basically I had the finger, then I had the knuckle, then I had the knuckle too. And basically we did those, their rotates equals the finger rolls times, and then we did a multiplying by a certain number. Way I like to start is having the object that's actually going to drive everything, where I got the finger roll and I can select the finger roll. So I do select the hand control, then I can select the finger roll attribute, and then I can go to Edit Expressions. And it's nice because it actually brings the entire thing up for me to select in the expression editor. And I can copy, Command C or Control C for copy. And then what I do is I select the finger joint. Now, it's hard to sometimes know which way to rotate, so I always kind of come out here, select my rotate tool, and take a look at which axis I want to rotate around, and you can see this is Z. And so I'm going to be using rotate Z in this case. And if I click on the next one, see it's also rotate Z. This one's also rotate Z. So they're all the same rotates. Okay, so again, I'm not always sure which one, but you know, you can use the rotate tool to help you see that. So I'll take the finger joint, rotate Z, finger joint dot rotate Z. This time I select it all, I don't use copy, but rather middle mouse, click and drag it down into the expression window. I'll click into the window and hit spacebar and type equals. And then I'm going to paste Command V or Control V on a PC, Command V as in Victor, right? Hand control dot finger roll. So the rotate Z is equaling whatever finger roll says. And then what we did in the class is then we said, okay, but we'll then multiply that number because it's going to be kind of slow. with just a direct relationship. So we'll multiply that by 3. And then I say semicolon. And then what I did in the class to make this a little bit faster was copy this portion right here, because I'm just going to repeat this pretty much. So I'm going to copy, Command C for copy. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go now to the next joint over. So I'm going to select right here. So I'm selecting knuckle joint. Same thing, rotate Z. I'm going to select it, middle mouse drag down, click in here, and now I'm going to paste. And I have all the equals, hang control, dot roll. The only thing different here is that instead of times 3, we did times 5, semicolon. I'll say create. Again, if you see a good result here, expression 1 or whatever, that's what you're looking for. If you see red, you did something wrong in terms of typing. So just watch out for that. And then lastly, I'll grab the knuckle 2. This is rotate Z. And then select it all. I'm going to middle mouse drag down. Click into the window. And then I'm going to paste. And then what we did with this one, we just multiplied this one by 8. I said semicolon. Say create. Once I have this on all 3 of those, you don't have to do one on the end. That one's actually, it's a weird sound I heard. So the finger end isn't actually going to be used per se for the rotating, but it really is actually just holding the skin out there and making it move with everything. So that's its purpose in this case. I'm just going to go ahead and close the window. And again, to run the finger roll, you click on finger roll and take your middle mouse and just anywhere in the space, just middle mouse, click down with your middle mouse and just drag, and you can see that it flicks back up and down like that. You got a real simple finger roll. Looks like I didn't set that one on the finger. I must not have said create on that. Let's take a look at it. So rotate Z. Yeah, I didn't do it on that one. I just copied. Well, that's going to throw a lot of people off. So I'm just going to come back to it. Just say finger joint, rotate Z. Drag it down. And actually, I can just say paste, because that's the last thing I had in there. And now I have finger roll 3, so I didn't say create. This time I'll say create. Again, you could see that it hadn't had the purple there. So I'm sure most of you out there saw me doing that while I was doing it. So now if I click on finger roll, I'm going to just now middle mouse back, and you can see that grabs actually the bottom finger. And that's what we wanted. And of course it bends too far backwards, but and we could change that. We could limit the amount of backwards that we have here, or forwards or whatever. If you didn't like seeing negative numbers here, we could do reversals or whatever. But for our purposes, this is really all we're after. Always make sure that you put 0 into the field there, so that you leave this at 0. You never want to ever leave any number other than 0 in these when you're in the rigging process. So there you go. That's the basic setup for the 160 class for the hand control. So I'm going to stop it here, and then I'm going to move on with the 161 portion where it gets a little more complex.